Welcome back to Film Music Focus. We have the great honor of having composer Alan Silvestri with us today, who is so well known for so many amazing scores over the years. Welcome to the show, Mr. Silvestri. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great, Justin. It's great to hear your voice and see you.
It is. Everything is good with you. Everything going on, family as well, and all good.
Yeah, we're doing well. We're all here together and kind of taking it a day at a time, like everyone else in the world, actually.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, isn't it?
It is.
You know, we're so happy to be able to have you, and I know that all of our listeners out there will be so intrigued with so many concepts. I hope we can cover some of them today. One of the things I'd like to kind of start off with, I mean, here we are, nearly 5 decades you've been in this business, which, to put it mildly, is an incredible feat. This is a volatile industry. It goes up and down, both creatively as well as through the focus of business. And I think that you're one of the very unique voices and artists in our craft that has survived and embraced and changed and evolved the industry over nearly 5 decades. I mean, what is that for you looking back? I mean, what does that mean? Nearly 50 years in this industry is incredible.
Well, you know, I didn't grow up with the aspiration to be a film composer. I was a musician, a player, and I loved music from a very early age. And, you know, life kind of just took its course, and I followed along. And so it is interesting now, after all this time, to kind of look back now and again. And, you know, the first thing that came to mind hearing your introduction is that I've always been interested in how we can make sound. And film music is one of these areas of music making that in many ways has always embraced not just our conventional ways of making sound, but experimental ways of making sound, unique ways of making sound. And so, you know, I see my movement with the movement of sound making as very kind of exciting from the point of view of what can we try? What can we do? What are the new tools? What's the new palette of colors that we can use to bring sound and music to film? And so I have to say I'm as excited about all of that as I was 50 years ago. Wow. It's still exploding, and the new possibilities as makers of music for film have at their disposal. It's, as you know, it's something that's changing quickly and daily.
It is changing quickly. It's incredible. Let's travel back in time to 1972, the Doberman Gang. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what was it like for you with your first feature picture, getting over the hump, so to speak, or the challenge of breaking that barrier, both perhaps emotionally, psychologically, musically, of taking that first step, which is an important step for all musicians to take, whether or not it's on their instrument, it's their first professional performance. It's, in your case, in this example, your first feature film score. Mm-hmm. What was it like getting past that roadblock, if there was one?
Well, I'm not sure which roadblock you speak of. The very fact that one may or may not have an opportunity clearly is the first and most daunting roadblock, I think. And then once one is on the other side of that, back in that day, staring at blank paper, then a whole other kind of roadblock appears. But the interesting thing is, as I said earlier, I had never started out to be a film composer, and here's the perfect example. It was basically a number of circumstances and serendipity that found me in a place where there was an opportunity to write some music for a film. It was all mistaken identity. Someone misread someone's name on credits. And next thing I know, I'm on my way to a meeting to spot a movie with a film producer. Now, I have to say, just to clarify that, I was working with a songwriter named Bradford Craig in Hollywood, cobbling a life together with trying to play guitar on a demo or do a little arrangement for a song demo, give a guitar lesson, anything I could do to stay alive. In 71, 72, I was 21, 22 years old. So here I am working as a demo guitar player for a lyricist, and it just so happened that Mr. Craig had written a lyric for a song with Quincy Jones, and it was for a movie called Last of Sheila, and they actually had been nominated for an Academy Award. So here's one way Hollywood can work. My friend Bradford Craig, the lyricist, was called about scoring this low-budget film. And apparently the producer just assumed Mr. Craig had written the score. And Brad was a lyricist. He didn't really write music, but he knew I knew something about notes. And so he called me up and he said, well, we have a chance to score a film. Why don't you write the score and I'll write any words for any songs that will be in it? And I said, sure, that sounds like a great idea. And I know I've told the story so many times, but it's absolutely true. I literally went to Pickwick Books on Hollywood Boulevard and walked in and asked if there were any books about how to score films. And they happened to have one, which was How to Score for Film by Earl Hagen. And I bought the book. I had a meeting the following morning, first thing. I stayed up, read the book, did the examples, listened to the little records in the back. And I had my first spotting session and meeting with a film producer. And they sent me home with the film, and I scored the film. And, so that brings us now to the second roadblock. So the first one we've passed now. We have a job. And it was interesting hearing you ask about this. First thing that came to mind to me was, at least in my case, you're so overwhelmed with what you now have to do. You have to now learn all at once the technical aspects of how you even do this. How does music join to a film? What's synchronization? We didn't have time code back then. How does anybody do this? What are streamers? What are punches? What is any of it? And we're not talking about what we're going to write yet. That's the next roadblock. Well, first is, how do I figure out how we even mechanically do this? But that, along with what then one does write, for me in that situation, it was so overwhelming. It's not an overstatement to say there was fear, there was terror even about all of this. And of course, there was also a deadline. And as much as we all like to think the deadline is the enemy, actually, in most cases, I think the deadline is our friend, because it's continuously calling us to focus and waste nothing, especially time. And so there it was. I had this project ahead of me. I was very fortunate in that they had a music editor who they hired, who had a lot of experience, certainly in television. His name was John LaSalandra. And so when I did walk in and saw a moviola for the first time, I had an experienced guide who could talk to me about what a cue list was and who knew how to develop timing notes, because that's how he did it. You would see a movie or a piece of film only once as a composer, and then you would have this spotting session, and that's all you saw until you were recording, if you got to record with projection. Everything you wrote to were timing notes that were taken down by a music editor. So again, lots of fear, lots of terror, lots of coffee. And if you're destined to survive all that, you are now a film composer with a credit. And in my case, it was a screen credit and a tape of the film cues that I had done. And the movie came out and it made a few bucks. So now we had a film that was enjoying a certain level of success, even though it was a very small, low-budget film. And I am a film composer. And from that...
you hit on I think one of the most common things that perhaps we all share in music, whether or not it's on the concert stage or it's writing for a film or a television show, and that's that concept of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And fear, and I don't know how you feel about the following, but I think if it's channeled well and channeled efficiently, it can actually help to clarify a great range of things, and perhaps sometimes you end up with a better creative product as a result. It maybe not always, but certainly sometimes enough to be able to justify embracing fear from time to time.
Yeah, I think what fear, we use the word fear, but fear translates on the, let's say, on the psychophysical level. It translates as adrenaline. It translates as energy. And I have found every time I've done a score that I need not necessarily fear, but I clearly need the energy. And that's where fear can be useful if there's no other way to generate the voltage needed to start to have the synapses that need to connect, then so be it. And as long as we all stay in front of the task, that is a place where fear can be useful, because it does always bring energy, and that's what we really need to kind of go beyond ourselves, go beyond our limitations, and discover new parts of ourselves that can ultimately be expressed in our music.
Well, 72, all these first encounters, so to speak, through the context of that project, fast forwarding 5 years to 1977, I'm sure most, if not all, of our listeners, and certainly those who have followed your career for so long, and I'm one of those people. That's a great one, and one of my favorites, just because of how, looking back, how stylized it is now and how rooted it is in that time period.
Yeah.
But not only that, just how fresh and fun that tune was. So we're going to take a quick look at the opening sequence to the 1977 series Chips. Feel free to kind of talk about what was going through your mind as we look at this clip. And wow, if there was ever a trumpet part to play,
I was brought in at the beginning of the second season of Chips. It had done quite well in its first season, but they felt it needed the equivalent of a musical facelift. And at this time, disco was the rage, as they say. And I was someone who was a rhythm section player. I now had my film credit, so I was a film composer. I had done some work for Casablanca Records, but I did not actually write that theme. That was written by the creator of the show, and it was there in the first season. Oh. It was done in a very, very different style. And it would be interesting for you to go back and check out what that main title sounded like in the first season. So my task was to, in a sense, reinvent it and bring it into this disco-oriented arrangement energy. And I remember I had recently married Sandra, and she bought a video machine for me when the Chips show arrived. And this was the first time I actually got to see something over and over again. Yeah, because before that, as I said, you would see the film once because it had to be projected, and then you would write the timing notes. And I remember sitting in the living room of her apartment with a guitar in my lap, sitting on the floor with this video machine and watching this footage and writing this arrangement. I think his name might have been Rick Rosner, the creator of Chips, and it was his theme. So I know a lot of folks think I wrote that. I did not actually write that theme, but I believe I wrote 120 hours of music for Chips.
Wow.
And for the most part, every cue, no matter what was going on in the show, had to have 4 on the floor. And it was just what the mission was on this. Yeah. And I had this spectacular band that was Gary Grant, Jerry Hay, might have been Gary Herbig, Bill Reichenbach, Steve Schaefer playing drums, Abraham Laboriel.
Was Larry Hall on that one?
Larry Hall played, on a lot of these. Neil Steubenhaus. We had like the greatest players who were making everybody's records in Los Angeles coming to do this TV show. And I had 4 string players, I think, and so I got to experiment with writing for some instruments I really hadn't written for. And it was amazing. And of course, the most amazing thing was I had a steady job in show business for 4 years. And I think I did 4 seasons of that show. Yeah. And, I would see one Monday morning, have a lunch break, and record Monday afternoon. And then every week, I think it was for 36 weeks running, I would see one on Monday, record one on Monday. Same thing next Monday. And it was a 7-day-a-week, actually an 8-day-a-week job back then. So incredible experience.
Great way to hone chops, I venture to say. And I think that, a lesson to learn from that for many of our listeners out there would, particularly those composers that are aspiring to, whether it's film music or television music or concert music, operatic music, is keeping the pencil to paper, so to speak. You take a break from playing an instrument, you take a break from writing. It's like any other muscle in your body, it needs to be flexed, and having an opportunity to not only do that, but to be employed at the same time in the business. I mean, what a blessing that is to have, and just to kind of pivot back to one of the things I was saying at the very beginning of the program, you've found ways to maintain that for nearly 50 years, and you've reinvented yourself in so many different ways, through sound and through rhythm and through emotion, which is arguably one of the most important things that music brings to film. The emotion in this next one, this was the first score that I had heard of yours when I was a young boy. Very quickly thereafter was Romancing the Stone. I went immediately out and got some of your other records the moment my father played. But this first one for me, here we are in D flat. The elephant in the room, right?
Right.
Brought to you by Cine Concerts.